In this week's episode, I am joined by Dr. Steve Yacovelli, the gay leadership dude. He is author of Pride Leadership and CEO of Top Dog Learning Group. We'll chat about the first ever transgender woman inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame, a $2 billion investment into Black women-owned businesses, and more. Hey there, my name is Bernadette Smith. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I've found is that there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for DEI stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these inclusive actions and policies within your own organization to help you build a more inclusive world. Let's get started. Steve, will you please introduce yourself and tell the world a little bit about who you are?
Thank you, Bernadette. I'm so excited to be here. This is way overdue for us. So I am indeed Dr. Steve Yacovelli, pronounced he, him, and his, the owner and principal of Top Dog Learning Group, and I am indeed also known as the gay leadership dude. So you immediately know 3 things about me with that self-described title: that I am gay, that I self-identify as a dude, and I really like to talk about leadership, especially inclusive leadership for our client partners that we have around the globe.
Awesome, Steve. Well, let's talk a little bit about your book and Pride Leadership. What is one thing that you would like every LGBTQ person to know about their leadership potential?
Yeah. So in Pride Leadership, I strategies for the LGBTQ plu. I say plu instead of plus just to be cool. Leader to be the king or queen of their jungle. It really started out as a quote unquote generic leadership book as I was going down this path and doing my research. And I've been in this field for like 30-ish years, and you see patterns of what works and what doesn't. And so that's kind of where I started putting things together. And then I started looking at our LGBTQ plus leaders, kind of doing some volunteer work, social justice work, like I know you and I do. And I started kind of looking at them through a different lens. And my little Carrie Bradshaw, if you remember Sex and the City, went off, and I couldn't help but wonder, is being queer, general term, help you look at leadership differently? And so the 6 competencies that I focus on in Pride Leadership are authenticity, courage, empathy, communication, relationships, and culture. And so when you put those through the rainbow lens, as I like to say, is there something different? And I argue, yes, there is. Exercising our authenticity as a leader. Now, everybody, gay or straight or anything in between, can really embrace authenticity as a leadership superpower. But what does that look like when it's through the queer lens? And so if I'm out at work, that's being my authentic self, and we could channel that power to be an even more effective leader than we already are.
Awesome. I love that. I think that's really, really valuable for folks to realize, because sometimes we let our marginalizations kind of get the better of us, but there's an opportunity to flip the script.
Yep, absolutely.
I love it. So, Steve, you live in Orlando, and I know that you have an anti-diversity Governor DeSantis there, and there's a lot of anti-LGBTQ laws being passed or proposed, and sort of it's an anti-diversity climate in the state right now. How are things going from your perspective? What's giving you hope?
Yeah, I have to say, as you well know me, Bernadette, I'm a glass half full kind of guy. Sometimes it's hard to fill up that half full glass these days in Florida. But one of the things that does give me hope is, well, a couple things, actually. One is the amount of noise that people are making with all these anti-queer legislation things happening. And then, I live in Orlando, which is this gorgeous, inclusive space. You saw that when the Pulse Massacre happened, how everyone said, no, we got our backs of our queer brothers and sisters and siblings, our people of color, our Jewish, et cetera, et cetera. And so that philosophy permeates throughout our community here. And you see a lot of people who are just awesome allies being like, this is ridiculous. And it's not just in Florida. And hearing, some my relatives who aren't the most inclusive of things going like, wow, that's not right. And them saying that and seeing the complexities, which is awesome. Couple that with the the hopefully louder but outspoken corporate partners we who are have been trying to defend our rights and our allowing us to exist kind of mentality. But you're seeing them more and more be like, no, we're not doing this, or going, and I will call out my former employer, the Walt Disney Company. I mean, there was some reasons, why the other Bob CEO kind of left, because he wasn't doing it right. Bob Iger came back in. He's amazing. And just some of the things that Disney's done to try to thwart the power of the current administration in my state has been really refreshing to watch. And so that gives me hope that, these exclusive, insert whatever expletive you would like here for LinkedIn audiences and such, would go on their merry way and really lose the steam, which they actually are losing the steam when you look at the polls and such.
That's great to hear. I mean, not being in Florida myself or in any of the other states where there is these legislation is being proposed or passed, it's not really clear to me what the corporate response has been, except for what I see on a national level. And I haven't seen much except for companies who have signed on to the HRC statement for business equality, which is, that's a few years old now. So in Florida, you're actually seeing companies really speak out against this. And
yeah, not as much as I really would like, to be very frank, but you are starting to see the cracks in the dam with people like the Walt Disney Company and you other major players in Florida, in Central Florida especially, just make it like, nah, we're not doing that. Or some of them are just quietly saying, you know what, our queer employees, we got you, don't worry, and that kind of mentality. I think it goes a long way, but I think it can go further, especially that vocal. I keep saying, I wonder how many of the folks who are going to rainbow wash their logos in June, what they should be saying right now in April or whenever you're listening to this, to show their support for the queer community.
I think that's a great point. So employees of companies who are listening, yes. Pride is not just in June.
Thank you. 12 months.
That's right. Show your support of LGBTQ employees and customers all year long. And if you need help, you can reach out to Steve or I.
Yes, that's what we do.
All right. So let's move on to this week's Good Vibes. So this week I wrote about checking the box. And I think that, in the DEI conversation, we hear a lot of like, don't check the box, because having a DEI strategy that's just sort of focused on box checking workshops is not going to really get traction. But I have to say, as the type of organized person I love checking boxes, and I love adding more and more boxes to check because it means I'm getting more traction and progress. And I think that philosophy is part of the work that we do here at Equality Institute. So I'm sort of looking for your perspective on, to check the box or not to check the box.
Well, whenever we look at inclusive programming for the workplace, I approach it as a change management project. And, years ago, I worked for IBM and I was a change consultant. And what we're trying to do when we brought in a new business process or new technology tool, we're trying to change humans' behavior. Well, it's the same thing with a D&I initiative. And so I think tick boxes are one of many arrows in your quiver. Absolutely. When it comes to making that behavior change and making that cultural shift within the workplace. And so, sure, hey, let's do unconscious bias training, tick, 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 tick. Awesome. But what else are we doing? What executive sponsorships are out there? How are we having that continuous communication strategy? What's our measurement strategy look like beyond the butts in seats kind of stuff? So boxes are cool, but if you're only doing boxes, then you're not going to change behavior and hearts and minds like you want to.
Absolutely. And I think that we need to make sure those boxes are holistic, cross-functional, and they build on each other. And we want to celebrate every time we check a box and keep the momentum up. Okay, Steve, let's move on to this week's Good Vibes. The first story comes from the National Women's Hall of Fame, which just announced its new inductee class. And for the first time, there is a transgender woman whose name is Sandy Stone. She's an amazing artist and academic in the field of transgender studies. And one of the other new inductees this year is Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality. So a great class this year for the National Women's Hall of Fame. And I love that they're expanding the diversity of their members or of their inductees.
Yeah, I read that story as well. And I was like, and one, I was like, I need to know Sandy Stone's story more, and like that kind of like we should know her amongst of the other pillars of our queer community, but yeah, it's things like that some people might be like, oh, that's a small step, but you know what? If I'm a trans woman and seeing that, I'm like, oh, awesome, like that has to feel good just to be seen, and especially someone like that honored within such a big organization. So I think it's awesome.
I think it is too. And representation does matter. Visibility matters. And especially when there are so many anti-LGBTQ things happening, we have to celebrate what's going right.
Yep.
Okay, the second story is regarding the March Madness finals. The women's NCAA basketball finals set record viewership numbers, and in part because it was broadcast more. It was on ESPN and ABC this year. But what I think was also really interesting was another story that came out of the championship, which was the double standard that was, let's just say, forced upon Angel Reese, who is the star of LSU, who made a hand gesture that Caitlin Clark, the star of Iowa State, did earlier in the finals. And Angel Reese was dragged by the media. Angel Reese, by the way, is a Black woman, and she was dragged by the media. Caitlin Clark was not. So we got to see sort of a racist double standard up close for the exact same behavior. And even though it's not really a good vibe, I do love the teachable moments, and I do love the viewership numbers for women's basketball.
Yeah, and it kind of relates to the story with the Tennessee state legislature, that also, the two Black gentlemen and then the one white woman all doing the exact same thing, and who gets kicked out? It's like, come on, friends, but let's turn that. And I think this is just going to blow up in their faces in a gorgeous way, because as of now, I haven't heard the latest today, but how they're voting that one gentleman, they're like, no, you're going right back to your job. And I'm like, yes, there are cool people out there. And it's kind of the same thing with the story with the March Madness stuff. So we got to see some ugliness, but I think it taught a lot of people and shone a light on some of those. And I didn't know the term that you put in the thing, the misogynoir. I thought I was like, and tie it to the intersectionality from Kimberly Crenshaw. I'm like, oh, that was kind of cool the way that came about.
Absolutely. So for those listening, the term that I used in the newsletter is misogynoir, which we will type, or Corey will type in the chat. And that essentially is misogyny, which is anti-woman bias, but specifically against Black women. So I certainly did not coin that term, and we will figure out who did and make sure that gets in the show notes as well.
That's great.
Okay, the third story comes from Bowie State University in Maryland, which is a historically Black college and university that decided to help its students bypass the arduous internship process at tech companies by creating its own placement program. The program has mentorship programs. It has partnerships with Deloitte and NASA and the federal government. And it's really expanding the opportunities for these young computer science students who could be our future tech leaders.
I love it. And this one really, really resonated with me because I have a lot of clients in big global manufacturers who want to do the right thing and really diversify their employee base, but they're challenged on how to do that. So programs like this, where they could just tap into that awesome pipeline, I'm like, yes, more of this, please, because I think that's where some of those changes happen. Companies want to do the right thing, but finding the right process in the way. I mean, you figure each company has to figure that out on their own. If they can just tap into an existing program like Bowie State's internship program, like how cool is that?
I love it. It's a win-win for everyone, right? And I think it's just showing that sometimes we need to disrupt the way things have been done in the past. All right. So the fourth story is from Goldman Sachs, which is a company we do not see very often here on Five Things. But what I love is that they have invested another $2 billion in Black women-owned businesses because, quote, economists at the Global Investment Bank have found the most efficient way to close the racial wealth gap is by investing in Black women. So the money's going towards everything from small business grants to incubator programs and a lot more to help those women thrive.
I think it's great. And I liked that they did it based upon research and looked at how that ripple effect goes from that Black woman-owned business to the community, to who they hire, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and based it upon the data. Because as you and I both know, and I'm sure a lot of folks listening and watching know, that being inclusive is good for business. And so by doing strategies like that, thank you, Goldman Sachs, for showing that this is the smart way to be both inclusive and hit bottom lines where we should.
Yeah, because they're going to be making money on those interest rates.
Right.
Exactly.
Exactly.
It's not all pure.
No, it's altruistic. No.
Not pure altruism.
It's still going to be good for inclusivity in the long run. So
that's right. I love the win-win. Okay, the fifth story comes from Bud Light, another, semi-altruistic move. They have a new partnership with transgender TikToker and influencer Dylan Mulvaney. And Dylan is a trans woman who has been chronicling her transition on TikTok over the past year or two. And the ad with Bud Light really ticked off a lot of folks.
I love it. I love it. And now Nike's also announced a partnership with Dylan and to feature her with their sports bras and some of the other lines of clothing. I'm like, absolutely yes. And what it's kind of fun, and maybe I shouldn't have joy in this, but schadenfreude, there's that, is watching these people lose their minds over these ads. And yes, Bud Light, and they've supported the queer community quite a bit. So we'll give them props where props are due. But the controversy and the drama, certain very irrelevant rock stars, and I'm using bunny ears for that one, shooting their gun, like, oh, come on, you're not relevant now. And here's an image from the 1990s with you performing with a drag queen, and and all these different things. It's like you're not as exclusive as you want to be, but you're just pandering to your base. And I think it's like lifting up a rock and seeing what crawls out. And I think it's very telling when ads are like this. But I applaud both Bud Light and Nike for saying, you know what, to heck with it. Yes, we're getting buzz, but we're also doing that representation matters. And how cool is that?
I completely agree. I love it. I love it. All right, Steve, tell folks how they can find you if they want to keep in touch.
Yeah, the easiest way is to go to our main website, our main doghouse, topdoglearning.biz, B-I-Z. You can find out all about the books, our training classes, the keynotes we do, and all sorts of ways that we can engage even on the free level. So topdoglearning.biz.
And all of that will be in the show notes. Folks, thank you so much for joining today. Thank you for listening. And if you don't already get the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Steve, thanks so much for being a fun guest. You are always a delight to chat with, and hope everyone has a great week.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Thank you for listening to 5 Things in 15 Minutes. I hope you found yourself inspired by at least one of this week's stories. If you did, would you mind sharing it with a colleague and leaving us a review on your favorite podcasting platform? And if you don't already get my 5 Things newsletter, join at 5thingsdei.com. I'm Bernadette Smith, and I'll see you next week right here for 5 Things in 15 Minutes, bringing good vibes to DEI.